yet hates a brother is a liar. Do we have any liars in the congregation? Any liars willing to admit? I'm one of them. For whoever does not love their brother or sister, whom they have seen, cannot love God, whom they have not seen. So how do you claim to love a being that you have not seen? Yet his creations that are with you don't experience that love. That verse tells me two things. That first, love for God and love for man are two ideas that are intricately interwoven, that you can't pull them apart. You can't say that, I'm just going to focus on God. And then when I get a chance, I will deal with these little heathens around me. It doesn't work like that. Loving man and loving God are two ideas that are firmly interwoven. The second idea that I get out of this is that in your journey towards loving God, you have to love man. There is an expectation that if you're going to claim to work your way to loving God, part of that journey involves loving other humans. The second verse that I also want to refer to, again, that we had read earlier, speaks about loving your neighbor the same way you love who? It doesn't say, love your neighbor the way you love God. Do you notice that? And I wondered, why did Jesus say that? Why specifically talk about the love that I have for myself? It turns out that most of us are fairly familiar with love for ourselves. And we express it in all kinds of ways. The first is that in many cases we think of ourselves as good people. And I'm assuming that some of you believe you're good people, right? For the most part, we think we are good people that can be flawed on occasion, right? And so if you are going to love a neighbor like yourself, then you ought to think about your neighbor as a good person who is just as flawed as yourself. And so when the other person makes a mistake, you look at it in terms of, here with me is a good person who has made a mistake. And the mistakes simply represent a momentary deviation from who they truly are at their core. Does that make sense? So that the mistake is not the human. This is a good person who just happened to have made a mistake. And so, the second idea that comes out is that in the human world, love is a team sport. And when you're talking about teams, you realize that is when it stops being about us. It's about the other person. The second idea that I want to speak about briefly again is taken from the book of Matthew 5:46 to 47. And it reads, "If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even tax collectors doing that?" And I'm assuming this is the IRS of the time, right? And clearly this comes from the background that the IRS of that time were perceived as fairly evil humans. Which is perhaps why the verse says that, hey, loving somebody that loves you is nothing different. Even the worst of the worst do that. It goes on and says, if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? So this particular verse speaks to the idea of sacrifice when it comes to love. Specifically, three things. Number one is that The biblical love described in this particular verse speaks to the idea that love requires folks to go above and beyond what is ordinary. Because anybody else, whether they are connected to religion or not, can show love. But what we are expected to do, according to this verse, requires us to go above and beyond. That means the biblical conception of love between humans indicates the idea of high expectations from us. Because then, otherwise, what's the difference? And then finally, it also requires some level of self-reflection. Taking account of what you're doing, what you have accomplished, and whether or not what you're doing simply represents the average. Now, before we conclude today's discussion, I think it would be necessary to talk about why this all matters. Apart from the fact that love is the most important commandment, why is this a subject that deserves careful attention? Now, it turns out that love is a very powerful tool. Again, going back to the example of folks who have been in love before, you realize when you truly love somebody, there's always that chance that you begin to idealize them. And especially think about the first, what we call the honeymoon phase, where there's infatuation and all the other feelings associated with that. In that moment, even when a person does something wrong, we simply gloss over it. In fact, somebody described this as the habit of collecting red flags. Right? Anybody who has enough of those red flags? Yes, they do something that is wrong, but you just gloss over it. Because in that moment, you are idealizing this individual. That's how much. And in fact, I suspect that's probably the reason why somebody said that love is blind. Because it makes you ignore some of the things that you have not ignored otherwise. The second idea is that the quest for love has the potential to destroy humans. Do you believe in that? In your journey to seek love, you might end up destroying yourself. How many folks have actually killed human beings in the name of love? That's how powerful love is. And finally, it turns out that love is medicine. Are there folks in the medical profession in here? Yeah, I can see them, but they're not willing to admit, because I'm not going to put you on the spot. But we know that whenever humans are surrounded with love, their mental, spiritual, physical, and all kinds of health is often enhanced. And we know that love has the power to melt even the coldest heart out there. And so I wish sometimes that what we do in church was all about love. When was the last time we had a discussion on love? I truly hope, after reading what I read this time around, I truly hope that we will not have to wait 1 year to talk about love. Especially in thinking about the fact that this is the greatest commandment of all. And so, as I finish, because I realize we're just about out of time, and I realize I'm the person standing between you and lunch. So I want to make sure that I finish in good time. I'm going to talk about 9 things that I hope you will remember. If you forget everything else we talk about today, here are 9 things that I want you to remember. The first is that every human being on the planet has the breath of life in them from God. That is the one thing that we all share. No matter your color, no matter where you live, no matter where you're born, no matter your age, the breath of life provided by God is exactly the same. The one place where we differ is in the body. We vary quite a bit. And so, one piece of advice that I got was that in many cases we often spend so much of our energy trying to feed the needs of the body, which is the one thing that we differ on. And we forget to feed the needs of the breath of life that is in us. We encourage this afternoon to think about addressing the needs of the life of God inside of you as you meet the needs of your body. The second idea that I want you to come away with is that think of love as a special muscle. One that does not grow old. And for those of us who work out, we know that you work out, you build muscles, and the moment you stop working out, it's a different story. And this often happens to me whenever I travel back home, because it often throws me out of my routine. When you come back, when I come back, I realize I can't even run half a mile on the treadmill. And so think of love as a special muscle that needs working out. But you have to give it the proper exercise. Nobody ever became a good swimmer because they played golf. Do you agree with me, church? You cannot become a good swimmer by playing golf. Neither can you become a good football player by swimming. And by football, I mean the real football, not the one they play with their hands and their heads. And so, my point here is, if you're going to become better at loving, after you pray, you actually have to do it. You have to love to become better at it. This is not one of those things that you sit and listen to a sermon and then you go back home and you're good to go. I guarantee you, this sermon is not going to be enough for you, not for me. I just learned that as far as love is concerned, I have to actually do it. So think of love as a special muscle that has to be exercised. The third thing is that when it comes to loving your neighbor, there's a couple of ideas that might be helpful. And the reason I say this is because for me, this is one of my biggest struggles, especially when it comes to individuals who bring harm to the people in my life, or individuals who bring harm to vulnerable populations. How can you expect me to love a person who just killed a 2-year-old? How can you expect me to love a person who just raped a 6-month-old baby? And these things happen. So I have a very difficult time thinking about love for the people who cause harm to people I care about, or individuals who cause harm to vulnerable populations. And so here are some ideas that I found useful that might help me navigate that part. One is that in loving other humans, it's helpful to think about the results of your love. As many of you know, that it's often the case that we tend to love other people in the same way we would like to receive love. And maybe that's not how they receive love. This is not a new idea. For instance, personally, I don't really care for cards or some note about birthdays. In fact, I only remember my birthday because I'm on Facebook. And so, by simply sending me a card or a flower, it doesn't change anything. But I know for a fact that a person who cares for the people I care about shows love to me. That's the way I receive love. So as we love others, instead of just thinking about giving them love in the way we know, we think about the results. Does that person experience the love we think we are giving them? And if not, then you have an opportunity to really think about how you are communicating that love. The second idea, and I tried it 2 weeks ago, is the idea of taking inventory of the virtues of the people in your life. When was the last time you took time to tell your other half 10 things that you love about him or her? When was the last time you took time to tell your parent just 5 things that you love about them? So it is helpful for us to get into the habit of taking inventory and sharing the virtues that we see in other people. The next idea is that if you're going to love a person, you have to see yourself in that person, such that if you're doing something good to them, you're doing it to yourself. And if you're doing something harmful to them, then you're doing it to yourself. In my tribe, we have a saying that goes, "Kitemo maraj, itimo nei. Kitemo mober, itimo nei." Basically means if you do good, you're doing it to yourself. And when you do bad, you're doing it to yourself. So that helps me make sense of this love for the other person. To the extent that when I think about doing something harmful, and that means I'm harming myself, there's a chance that I might restrain myself. So to love other people, think of yourself as a part of them. And here's where this idea came from. First, this rabbi was speaking about the notion that when God created Adam, he created Eve at the same time. Now that doesn't seem to make sense based on what we all know. It turns out that, in fact, when it came time to create Eve, God did not get a new sample of soil. He simply took a piece of Adam. I believe you've read about that, right? And the piece that he took from Adam was created when he created Adam. So what that means is that at the time he created Eve, all he did was to separate the two of them. And so in a sense, love is about unity, taking us back to how we were built as one, seeing yourself in the other person. The other idea that I also learned about, and this one comes straight from the book of Luke 6:31, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, that do to others as you would have them do to you. That, to me, I can handle as a human being, especially thinking about folks who do harm to the people I care about. Even when I want to do something harmful to that person, then I might step back and think about doing to them what I would appreciate receiving. The next idea is about cultivating the desire to fulfill what is important to other people. So if I love you, what's important to you is going to be important to me. And let me bring that back to our context as all nations here. This time around, I was nominated to work with the Education Committee. And it turns out that in applying this principle, anything that is important to the women's ministry should be important to me because I love the women of the church. Anything that is important to the choir should be important to me. Same thing as the Pathfinders. Right now, we've heard Brother George talking about helping the Pathfinders travel. That is an important event for them. And if I love him, that which is important to him should be important to me. And so, brother, feel free to text me as soon as possible. Yes. And if you can get in the habit of doing that, then you're actually communicating love to that person. Now, it doesn't mean that if it's important to them, you have to agree with them. It simply means that what's important to them has to be given due consideration. You take it seriously. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. And so the next thing I want to highlight is the idea that it's helpful to control our negative reactions when the people we love are not exactly where we think they should be. And I love this the hard way. Those of you who are close to me already know that I'm one of those people that sometimes I struggle with the issue of time. If I say we are going to meet at 8:05 and it's 8:06 and I don't see, I begin pacing back and forth. But if you live in an average African community, you know that is not how things work. What I tell my white colleagues, or my American colleagues, is that as an African, I control time. Time does not control me. We have a flexible definition of time. And so I found myself reacting in ways that are not pleasant, particularly on days my wife would take a little while to be ready for church. Until I learned that in that moment, by simply giving her grief, I am not making anything better. I'm not making anything better. Yes. And I recognize that she is not where I want her to be. Because this idea is all about me. I want you to be where I think you should be. And so learning to control what you can control, particularly our negative reactions, is helpful. And then finally, one of the most important things that I learned is that if you are going to become better at love, then you have to learn about it and teach it. Not just learn and sit with it. As I mentioned earlier when I started talking, is that this is not one of those subjects that I would have taken time to read about. And teachers will tell you that one secret that we have is that we know that whenever we teach things, we become really good at those things. If you have ever taught something, you know that when you teach, you become good at it. So learn about love and teach about it. Lastly, I want to invite you to participate in an exercise with me. If you're crossing your feet, can you uncross your feet? If your shoulder is high up, can you relax it? If you're sleeping, this is when you need to wake up. And I'm going to ask you, for those of you who can, put your hands on your knees on your laps. If you have a book on your lap, just put it on the next chair down. Relax your shoulder and then sit upright. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. Close your eyes and take 3 very slow, deep breaths. After doing that, I'm going to invite you to think about one person. A person either in your present life or a person who was in your life in the past. They may be deceased. Think about one person who has shown you unconditional love. Think about some of the beautiful experiences you had with that person. Now next, I'm going to invite you to think about one person in your life today that could use unconditional love. One person that you believe you have not given unconditional love. I'm going to ask you now to slowly open your eyes. I believe you know what to do. May God bless you. Amen.